Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Recording in progress.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All praise is due to Allah, the most gracious and the most merciful, who continues to bestow upon us His endless compassion and guidance. May peace and blessings be upon the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who brought light and wisdom to all of humanity. It is with great honor and pleasure that I welcome you all to today's international guest lecture titled The First Decade of Global Food Policy, the Past, the Present, and the Future. My name is Liko Maryudianto, and I will serve you as your Master of Ceremony for this important academic event. Before we begin, let us start this meaningful occasion by reciting Basmalah together. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. May this event bring us knowledge, blessings, and fruitful discussion. Allow me to acknowledge and warmly welcome our distinguished guests. Professor Barry M. Popkin, PhD, from W.R. Kennan Jr. Distinguished Professor at the Gilling School of Global Public Health, University of North Carolina, as our keynote speaker. Professor Dr. Fazli Jalal, PhD, Rector of Yarsi University, along with his leadership team. Professor Dr. Pratiwi Puji Lestari Sudarmono, PhD, Microbiology Clinical Specialist, Dean of the Faculty of Medicine, Yarsi University, and her faculty team. We are also pleased to welcome all faculty members, students, professionals, and participants joining us on site and virtually via Zoom. To our offline participants, we kindly remind you to scan barcode at the entrance door to confirm your attendance and access WhatsApp group. To our Zoom participants, welcome and thank you for joining us. We kindly remind you to access the link which it will be shared along the event. Please stay with us until the end of the session. To ensure eligibility, we appreciate your attention and participation. To officially open the session, I invite everyone in the room to stand and join in singing the Indonesian national anthem, Indonesia Raya. Thank you. Please be seated. Before we begin our main event, I would like to invite all of participants to take documentation. You can still remain on your seat. Oke. Siap semua hadirin? Please, all of participants to stand. Okay, I will take 1, 2, 3. Okay, once again. Thank you. We now move to the main academic session. It is my pleasure to hand over the session to our moderator, Professor Dr. Fazli Jalal, PhD, Rector of Yarsi University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Prof. Fazli Jalal to the stage. Before we begin the academic session, allow me to briefly introduce our moderator and first speaker today, Professor Fazli Jalal, the current rector of Universitas Yarsi. Professor Fazli is a distinguished public health expert with a long-standing commitment to education and national development. He earned his PhD in community nutrition from Cornell University with minors in epidemiology and Southeast Asian studies, and completed his medical degree at Andalas University Padang. His illustration career includes Vice Minister of National Education of the Republic of Indonesia from 2010 to 2011, Chairman of the National Population and Family Planning Board from 2013 to 2015, and multiply key leadership roles at the Ministry of Education. He will begin with a presentation titled Overview of the Nutrition Burden Indonesia, followed by introducing our keynote speaker and leading this discussion, Professor Fazli. The session is now yours.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are so blessed and honored to have Professor Barry Popkins with us. He is a renowned and also pioneer in many aspects of nutrition, especially as the one who introduced the nutrition transition in the world that affect a lot of national policy. He's worked for almost 4 decades in nutrition transition and also lifestyle. And in addition to that, how the company technology can impact on our dietary consumption, but also lead to some of the sedentary life, which is in combination will lead to obesity, and then later on will have health consequences like the pandemic of obesity lead to the what we call non-communicable diseases. You know, the top 4 of our in our National Social Insurance, Professor Barry Popkins, the top 4 what we call the spender of our national budget are non-communicable disease like stroke, hypertension, and also diabetes mellitus, and the other one is on the neurologist aspect. So his work in starting from India, Philippines, US, of course, yeah, and also went to South Africa, Chile, and Colombia. At the beginning in India, during the formative years of his research, really bring the new perspective, how nutrition transition happening all over the world. And then we as developing countries follow his suggestion, his step, because we don't want to be trapped on the how technology with all benefit, but also can have some health consequences to a majority of the population. So I don't want to take his time. I would like just to welcome him because we are so honored to be given special lecture by him. He is a renowned nutritionist, very influential in the developing policy on food, on the how taxation to some of the processed and ultra processed food can lead to better health condition of the community in the country. So he proved that in Chile, he shown that in South Africa, and also in Mexico. And hopefully one day we will discuss this thoroughly, Professor Barry, how the changing in dietary pattern and the lifestyle of Indonesian can be guided as such. So finally we can have better health outcome in our policy and our program. So with that, we have plenty of time for discussion. Maybe but 1 hour we listen to Professor Barry, and 1 hour we can have interaction. So by 11 we'll be close, and hopefully you will have enlightening and also inspiring and thought-provoking discussion. Let's welcome Professor Barry Popkins.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here. Can everybody hear me in the back? Okay. My slides, please. So what I want to do in this talk today is go over with you these 4 or 5 different areas here. At the beginning, I'll briefly talk about why we're here where we are today and the situation with changing diets in this country and across the low and middle income world, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and beyond. And after that, I'll talk a little.
Recording stopped.
After that, I'll talk quite a bit about what we've learned from healthy food policies that have been passed in the last decade in Mexico, Chile, South Africa, Colombia, and other countries. Predominantly.
Recording in progress.
Excuse me. And I'll go through a number of policies and what we've learned so far and what we've learned doesn't work. And our goal is that we'll, over the next 10, 20, 30 years, learn what works best across the globe to make a healthier lifestyle for everybody. And using national regulatory and mandatory policy to deal with some of the worst aspects of our food system and our food environment. And then I'll talk in that section about policies that are being evaluated and have been evaluated and results from rigorous, tested, published in the best peer-reviewed medical and public health journals. And after that, I'll talk a little bit about some new battles going on across the world now, countries that are moving close to passing new laws. And finally, kind of what our future holds. What are some of the questions people are asking across the globe, and what are some of the new policies that are being considered for the future? Of course, these policies will be tested in countries, and we'll see what works and we'll learn. But only science can tell us what works and doesn't and how we can move forward. And that's really what I want to talk about. So what I want to begin with is briefly, over thousands of years, we have evolved to where we are today. But a lot of what we bring to the bear as we face this food environment is our biological taste developed over many, many thousands of years to allow us to eat properly and grow. And in fact, hunter-gatherers and the early man with a very, very diet were tall. Those who lived without infectious diseases ended up being much taller. For example, in India, there were 2-meter tall skeletons of men and women in Mohenjo-daro from long ago when they ate this very diet, and then they moved around and were quite healthy for those who lived and didn't face infectious diseases. So with that, we have many preferences, and I want to really talk not about the first couple much, but to tell you that a lot of our science is only in the last 20, 25 years. For example, in the 1990s, we didn't know that what you drank doesn't affect what you eat. So if you drink tea or coffee, you don't change your diet intake. But if you drink a sugary beverage or 100% fruit juice, which is essentially sugar water, you gain calories, but you don't change what you eat in the way of food afterward. There's no compensation. And that is just learned really in the late 1990s, early 2000s with a series of studies that showed exactly that what we drank did not affect what we eat. And that explained why sugar-sweetened beverages, 100% fruit juice, and other things are not really recommended. What we recommend is real fruit or tea or coffee without much sugar or water, but not the unhealthy beverages that we increasingly are seeing being consumed across Indonesia and across the world. And then moving down, I want to just speak briefly about 2 areas. One is snacking. You may not know it, but really no place in the world snacked before 1900, and really minimally before 1950. It's only in the last 50 years, potentially 30, 40 years, where industry has been increasingly promoting and pushing us to consume more and more snacks. Many of them are ready to eat or ready to heat, and most of them are not very healthy. And that is a new behavior. And so we're moving to the point where in your country, you'll have a number of people that snack on 3-4 times a day. In my country, 30% of the population snacks 5 to 6 times a day, or eat that many times, including meals, which changes the whole biology. We're no longer sated and feel hungry. We're just constantly eating. And it's a new behavior, really, that the food industry has sold. And they really, beginning in the 1970s and later, they promoted snacking very heavily in marketing, and the food environment, as you know, today is full, as you turn to every corner, to see sold different snacks, sugary beverages, and so forth. And the other is something that I won't spend as much time on. It could be a lecture in itself. It's the whole concept of food processing to the point where the food isn't normally processed like we've had for long periods of time where we mill rice, we mill other grains, and we create breads and many other things with some salt and water and very simple technology. But a whole new technology called we named ultraprocessing, which is really where a lot of the basic grains and proteins that are in the packaged processed food are decomposed not by milling them simply, but pulling them apart almost to the molecular and cellular level, and then reconstituting them with a lot of different additives and emulsifiers and other things, pulling together what is as much, if you've ever seen it in a factory, you can't explain what it is. And then you see with colors, additives, emulsifier, they reconstitute it to look like a potato chip or whatever food you're selling, whatever bar or other ready-to-eat food or ready-to-heat food or other thing that you see packaged in the supermarkets and small stores throughout the country. So that food and the whole
Recording
history,
stopped.
whole history behind
Recording
it.
in progress.
I'm not sure if I touched the table if that happens. I know. So if you go in a store that sells food, you'll probably notice that 2/3 of the store, the edges may have fruit, vegetables, meats, dairy products, healthy products that we need to eat. But in the middle, there'll be all this packaged food, and it will be increasingly full of ultra-processed food that is not made like it was made 50, 70 years ago with processing
Recording
and
stopped.
items added to it, sugar, sodium, salt, whatever, but processed to a whole new level where it's so digestible, it moves through you very quickly. It doesn't have the fiber and other things that slow down our digestion and create the satiety we need for much longer. So because it's so super digestible, along with having all the extra added sugars, sodium, saturated fat, it becomes addictive. And there's a whole set of psychologists in the US and Europe that are showing how addictive it is and moving it into the psychological handbook and calling and categorizing it as addiction. And it's going through that process right now. So these foods are unique and different, and we need to understand them, and we need our regulations to begin to think about them. But moving on, not going to go through this whole complex period of change in how we eat, drink, and move, but talk about the period where we're now, where it's just a period where from infancy onward, we're eating very unhealthy food. And as the process has changed, not only is our body composition shifting, but our likelihood of getting all the non-communicable diseases because our diet is increasingly full of extra sodium, saturated fats, and highly refined carbohydrates to the point where we really don't get filled in the way we did with ordinary healthy meals. And it's leading to a lot of changes, leading to hypertension, diabetes among adolescents that you never saw in 30 years ago. They weren't even found among adults under the age of 40. So you're now finding a lot of type 2 diabetes in younger children that we didn't have ever before, and that's because the diet shifts and all the other kinds of lifestyle shifts that have come associated with this modern time. But let me go on and talk about Indonesia briefly and other countries. So the top map shows the distribution of overweight and obesity prevalence in the 1990s. The bottom one, which includes your latest demographic health surveys, shows a picture where among adolescents and children, our overweight and obesity have really gone up. We're now talking 20 to 40% of the population, and in another 10 to 20 years, it's going to be higher. And that's happening across the world. As you can see, the colors shifting toward the darker reds and oranges away from the green, which existed in the past. Still, a lot of countries have lower levels among children, but it's changing in every country in the world quite rapidly. Of course, some of the worst cases are my country, some of the Latin American countries, Egypt and others in the Middle East. The next point is about the fact, and I'll explain this slide, but it talks about the fact that the poor in Indonesia and in countries across Southeast Asia and other regions are overweight and growing overweight faster and higher levels than our higher socioeconomic status groups in your country. In this case, using a wealth index across all these countries in low and middle income world, you can see in East Asia and the Pacific and Latin America and part of the Middle East and South Asia, the higher level, the dark blue means the poor are overweight more than the higher SCS group, higher wealth groups. And in the bottom light blue, it's the countries, and particularly in Africa and a few still in Latin America and elsewhere, where the higher income adults, higher wealth adults are much more overweight than are the children, and the poor, the poor. So this is showing that in this country now, overweight is a problem of the poor. And it's increasing going to be a problem of the poor. And what that means is there'll be more and more untreated or poorly treated non-communicable diseases. And that's where prevention comes in a very significant way, because it will affect people without really they're going to doctor. It's not treatment, it's prevention. And that's what I'm talking about here today. And here, I want to point out, after I present this about children a little bit and infants, but here you see the growth, and this is not the absolute growth because this is just from the main stores in each of these countries and not all the small little shops and places and street foods and things. But the junk food is increasing across the globe, and it's particularly increasing now in low middle income countries. It's very high intake already in Europe, the US. Our markets are penetrated. So all the modern food sector is moving to market in low middle income countries. You're the new market. They want to penetrate like they penetrated us, and want to make you unhealthy like they've helped non-communicable diseases. It's a problem of malnutrition as well that we are finding today. This slide shows for low middle income countries, pretty much all the growth in sugar consumption is in that area. And it's sugar in these foods. And it's sugar that we don't have as much in the high-income countries. So you'll find many products where in Switzerland, Nestle adds no added sugar, but in Indonesia, they add added sugar. India publicized a whole number of these. Journalists found and discovered a whole number of products that were not have any added sugar in Europe, but had it in India. And the same is true across Southeast Asia. We know that. And we know something I'll talk about first. In studies, I'll talk about first. In studies that have done across this region, we find that infants, about 25% of infant calories today come from unhealthy, non-essential junk food, often sugary beverages. In this case, about a fifth or sixth of what infants are fed comes from that. And daily, about every third, fourth infant is consuming a sugary beverage. But it's the total calories from all this junk food that we're feeding to our infants increasingly, and that is across Southeast Asia. So it's a whole new issue that we never saw 20, 30 years ago emerging. So it's another component of stunting that is not very often talked talked about. And now I'm going to move and shift. The main focus of this talk is about healthy food policies. Our group has been involved in working with countries in Latin America, Africa, Asia on healthy food policies. And we've been very involved in providing research for the advocacy and medical people and the nutrition people in the countries, meeting with ministers of health and their staff and others, and working through these issues. And also working with non-governmental organizations trying to promote a lot of these issues and trying to create new policies to help deal with the unhealthy food environment. And fiscal policy, we've been very involved in sugary beverages taxes. I'll talk about that. And increasingly also countries are taxing unhealthy food the same way they're taxing sugary beverages. Also with marketing regulations, with front of the package profiling. I'll talk about all three of these much more. We have much better results. And I won't speak yet that much about healthier school feeding. Personally, I was involved in, President Mandela had me come and start their school feeding program with a South African colleague. And I've been involved in school feeding across countries, and we've been funding an evaluation in Brazil of the most unique school feeding program. In Brazil, where they stay a country about 2/3 your size, they have about 60 million children, 2 to 18, that they provide breakfast, lunch for, and 2 snacks a day in their school feeding program. And in the past, it used to be 30% of the food had to be real, coming from local farmers that would help enhance employment as well among smaller farmers. But now they require 90% of the food be real food, not highly processed. And the nutritional change, we had a national diet survey in children earlier, and we conducted one this last year and a half. And the results have shown, and they'll be coming out in published papers by our Brazilian colleagues, but that significant change when we move down, we remove the ultra-processed food and we put back real food in the diet. Enormous nutritional benefits, fiber up, protein up, more complex carbohydrates, better vitamin profile, and certainly much better for the children nutritionally, as we saw from our other data. So I won't talk more about, you're going to begin a national school policy. It's a beginning. You don't have the infrastructure Brazil had where they could make these shifts, but in the future, it'll be a challenge to shift from catered food and other unhealthy food products, which are usually highly processed, often ultra-processed, often 2/3 of that from the caterers, and to shift back to real food. That will be a super challenge for your generation after the infrastructure is created across the country for these school feeding programs. So I will go on and talk about first Chile, Mexico, and South Africa. I'm very involved in all three countries in the development. In fact, in Mexico, I worked from on and off from 2002 to 12 with my colleague Juan Rivera before they got the tax, and we worked with a non-governmental organization that worked with others to help promote all these activities. And we came and did many things in the country. And the same in Chile, where I worked again with Ricardo Huawei and other great scientists to begin their program. These were some of the early revolutionary programs, and I'm going to talk in detail about them and Colombia as an example of the new kinds of taxes and programs underway. So taxation is really a key option. As you know, for several years your government has had on the books SSB tax. It hasn't happened yet. We have a lot of evidence on SSB taxes now. And we have so much evidence that, for example, in the year after we published a British Medical Journal article evaluating Mexico, within a year and a half, 40 countries adopted the policy because they had seen evidence it worked. And they should know from tobacco and other areas that taxes on food that's not necessary to consume really work and really help the population. And I'll show you some of that evidence from Mexico and South Africa with two different tax designs. But the largest taxes we've had on sugary beverages were in the Gulf states, where I met with the Gulf Council and suggested you could tax 50 or 100%. You've got such a rich, and they ended up taxing 50% on sugary beverages and 100% on energy drinks, it worked, and it was quite impactful there, even with the high incomes. But let's go on and talk about them. So the one thing I want to bring up when I talk about the sugary beverages is the poor drink more of them than the high-income population. And the poor don't have the same level of income. So when you put a tax on, it's from what my economist hat, I have a PhD in economics also, it's regressive. It's making the poor pay more than others. But from a health perspective, because we know low-income populations in this country and every country in the world are more poorly diagnosed, much less treated, and more poorly treated in terms of medical care than our higher income and education households and individuals, that this tax is quite progressive from a health perspective. And it's that we have to talk about, that it really is helping prevent diseases among low-income populations. So your country has talked about it and have a tax on the book, but they haven't implemented it yet. I hope they'll change, and I hope they'll change some aspects of it. But I'm now going to talk about the first two of the first large countries with the taxes. Mexico, which taxed volume, and South Africa, which taxed grams of sugar. And they ended up both being about a 10% tax. Not that high, not high like we recommend to the 15, 25% level, which is what WHO recommends now, 20%. And some parts of WHO are pushing for higher, but the fact is it's difficult to get countries to go that high at this point, but we're getting more. But in Mexico, after the first 2 years of the results, you see after year 1 in the light blue and after year 2, and this is broken up into income tertiles. So it's the bottom income tertile, the middle, and the upper. And you see the reduction was much higher in the poor. You see what happened in the middle and upper income, and you see in the second year, which is usually the peak year of impact of these taxes. And then if the taxes keep being adjusted for inflation, it continues about at that level. And that's a significant decline in sugar, as I'll talk about later. But I want to go on and mention South Africa. And South Africa's tax now is adding fruit juice, but at that point they didn't have it, and they excluded dairy products also. They're changing that now. But the point is the tax was 10%, but the difference was by taxing grams of sugar, it gave a big incentive for industry to reformulate and reduce the amount of sugar. And that happened across everything, so that they had a decline in purchases of 29%, but because the down, sugar content was halved from beverages, which tends to be in most countries where there's high consumption sugary beverages. It's about half of the sugar intake. So that's about a quarter of total intake when you put it in individual dietary intake terms. Significant effect. And you go on today, and these are the countries in the world that have passed taxes. You haven't implemented yet, but you have a lot of Asian countries, certainly countries across all continents have put in this tax. And there's all these countries in blue are the ones that put the taxes in. And these are taxes for health. There are a lot of normal excise and other taxes in countries that tax everything. But these were when they added extra rates for sugary beverages because of health concerns. And hopefully you'll join this group. And I want to bring up one big argument. If you were involved in government, industry would come in and saying, and you'd hear it constantly in the news and elsewhere, that there was a big battle in your country, that it's going to hurt employment. And we've studied this in many countries. In some countries, we've had very detailed data from their central bank. And we've looked at a lot of, not only us, but many other economists and researchers in UK and other countries. We've never seen an adverse impact on employment. The beverage companies can sell water, they can sell flavored water, they can sell sparkling water, they can do a lot of things that are healthy. So it doesn't have to be sugary beverages. And this is just one example. We find the same thing with the front of package profiling, which I won't mention but in much detail. But Chile, where I'll talk about the front of package profiling, had a bigger profound effect on what we eat, but no employment effect. Companies just sold different, healthier products. This is the countries with the food tax. It's increasing. We're seeing large numbers of countries move to 10% tax on unhealthy food. In many of the countries, it's after they have a warning label, and then they tax those foods with the warning label because they had high sugar, sodium, saturated fat. And it just enhances the benefits of the warning label. And I'll come to one country, Colombia, which now has a 15% tax on food with the warning label, food high in added sugar, sodium, saturated fat. Also in their country, they've added ultra-processed foods are categorized in that area. And now in this November, it'll go to 20%. So that's the highest tax for health that we see. And what we do is push these countries to use the taxes for school feeding, for giving subsidized healthy food to the poor and others. And we're starting to work with that with several countries and ministries of finance who want to work systems to give money to the poor only to buy certain healthy fruit and vegetables, seasonally appropriate ones. So that's another area for the future, but Colombia is the first country with a large food tax for health reasons. And we now know of other countries pushing to higher taxes as well. And now I want to talk about, before I start on front of the package labeling, talk about Thailand and Singapore. I worked and convinced Thai FDA and my Thai colleagues at Mahidol and other universities. And together, we convinced the government to put in a warning label required in a choices, healthy choices label. Later, we studied the choices in the Netherlands where it was mandatory, and we saw it had no impact, just a tiny impact on purchases in terms of improving them and reducing unhealthy purchases. And the traffic lights, the Nutri-Score, the Australian STAR system, and the Singapore system, none of them have, in any study where they've looked at changes in purchasing and so on, have been able to show a significant reduction in purchases of unhealthy food and really big changes. So I'm going to talk about the only approach now that I've certainly begun to support that is based on a long history of using warning labels in tobacco and alcohol and really seems to work. Its impact is great in the countries that have been evaluated so far, and I'll present one of those very evaluations for Chile. And I'll talk about evaluations in another very low-income country, Peru, but I won't present the results. Chile had created first what we call a nutrient profile model, which is something lacking in this country, where we identify nutrient cutoffs that anything above this level is unhealthy. So if you have more than a certain number of grams of sugar or a certain number of milligrams of sodium in the food, 100 grams, it's unhealthy, or the same for saturated fats. And with that, they used it to create a front of the package labeling warning label. They also used it to create a marketing law that restricted marketing of these products with the warning label on them. And they created restrictions. They couldn't be brought to school or sold in school or eaten in school or served in the school feeding. So it banned all these warning label high in added sugar, sodium, saturated fat, and energy-dense foods. And now they're planning a tax on these foods and use the money to subsidize giving money to low-income households through an app that they can use only to buy seasonally appropriate fruits and vegetables, legumes. So Chile's marketing law, which is one I want to bring up briefly, and particularly for one reason. Originally, we had a complete ban on marketing to children. And you would see on children's TV, on billboards aimed at children and everything, no warning label food could be talked about or included. And then we found that the TV ads moved, and the other ads moved to adult content shows that the children watch. And so the government then shifted and put in a marketing ban from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. UK has a law to change it to 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. And there's one country now putting in a marketing ban that's going to make it all day and all night, just 100% ban on anything with the warning label on it. You can't see marketed. So that was very important. The other thing that Chile did that I'll show you a picture of in a second is they removed all the characters and everything from the package. So if the package had a warning label, because it was high in added sugar, high in energy density, high in added in sodium or saturated fats, it had warning labels like you see the black label on the right. And then you could have no pictures on it that were about characters or anything. You could have no positive wording. You couldn't have. So in Christian Chile, for example, Santa Claus, which used to have a picture of Santa Claus on this chocolate bar, and has nothing on it now, plain packaging, because you can't have the Santa Claus on this chocolate item. And this happened across all these packaged foods, removed all the wording, all the positives that children love, and all the colors and characters and so forth. And they're highly effective component. And the labels were in Chile only 10%. They're 15% of the package in Mexico and up to 20% now in Colombia and Argentina and a number of countries in the world. And so they're making them larger. In this case, it said in Spanish, high in saturated fat, high in sodium or sugar. But some countries use pictures because they have a high level of literacy in the country. Israel uses pictures because they have a large Bedouin population that doesn't read. And so you have different types of warning labels in different countries. But they're all talk about these kind of areas of high-end, of food, of nutrients, and except in Colombia, they only talk about this. Colombia's added ultra-processed foods as well. They talk about on the warning label. But then this is what happened in Chile, and it's quite impactful. We had a 37% reduction in sugar purchases by these households, a national sample of food purchases done for the whole year. Enormous change. A quarter of their calories almost, and 22% of their sodium intake reduced, and a smaller reduction, 16% of saturated fat. But in terms of population science, shifting the distribution over that much has an enormous effect in the long term on prevalence of overweight, diabetes, hypertension, and so many other non-communicable diseases you can imagine. And also, for a country like yours, it will affect infants as much in their food that they're consumed. So, profound effects. We found in Peru, a much lower income country that only had the warning label, a similar large effect that we were shocked with after a year from not having marketing bans and the other things, only the front of package labeling. We found that. And other countries now have instituted both, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I want to bring up one point. These are quotes from mothers. We did huge focus groups in low and middle income areas in Chile after 1 year and after 3 years. And after the first year, this is some of the quotes that the low-income mothers were telling us. Their children came back from school telling them not to buy the black labels. They're not healthy. I want to have salad. This is children 6 to 12, 11, not the adolescents. Our focus groups on the adolescents say they don't want to change. They'll follow the rules in school, but they'd like to have the junk food also. So the changes we're going to make are in children and toddlers for the future. And that's really where we want to change the culture of eating the most. We may change what adults consume, as we did in Chile and elsewhere, but they aren't really changing their whole culture of eating as completely as we're going to do for the young kids. And so that's the generation we're really shooting to change completely in their whole culture of what they think about in food. And Chile's marketing restrictions, we found enormous reductions in exposure from just the children TV, but we doubled that level of the reduction when we went to 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. reduction in seeing warning labels. The gap in Chile, and a gap that's being filled by other countries now, was no control for digital marketing. That means all the social media you see on your smartphones, computers, and all the different places where you see as you're texting and doing things, food ads of all sorts come up. Particularly children, where they're targeted at children and adolescents, to the point where they know exactly what they like and don't like and tailor their ads toward them. So we really have new frontiers in marketing. But in terms of front of the package labeling, we now know that, and after Chile and the evaluations, again, a huge number of countries have already passed laws. Right now, Kenya and Ghana and South Africa. Ghana has a book, the resolution already reviewed by the public, and they're soon to announce this front of the package warning label there, and the same in Kenya. Ghana's a couple years away. But there are other countries in Africa. India's been considering for several years. They've stopped other attempts by industry to push for traffic lights and health stars. But we still, and the industry and the medical, the whole medical and nutritional establishment and journalists are all behind a warning label. And so it's, and the health committee of the parliament also, so it's increasingly becoming clear they're going to have to push toward the warning label. But it's a long battle in that huge country. But we're seeing other countries. But again, I want to reiterate, the warning label is the only one that's been shown to impact and reduce unhealthy nutrients that we want to reduce. We do not see these changes from all the other approaches. The choices, the Singapore system, the Australian health stars, the TRAF, all these grading systems haven't worked. They're too confusing for people. They don't understand. They want something really simple. If you know from the people that study consumer behavior in a store, people spend 10, 15 seconds max buying a product. They don't go look at the nutrition facts panel and study it and say this is healthy or unhealthy or look at the ingredients. They don't do any of that. And we really need something simple like the warning label has proven to be, seems to really work. And now I want to talk about some policy gaps that scientists around the world are working on. People are doing research, we are, others, on thinking about labeling ultra-processed food and how to label it and how to use it for policy. Colombia is using one approach that some studies of mine shown worked best, using several categories of Codex additives, which are in the ingredients list on the back of the package, as the indicator. And there are countries, countries now exploring adding something like dental caries mouth or some unhealthy looking kind of disease problem to highlight, along with the warning labels, some pictures and stuff like they've used in tobacco. And that's being studied and considered. Australia has done research on that, scholars there, scholars in other countries in Latin America too. So it's being considered. The taxes on food is something that's new, but increasing. There's a number of countries now have it on the books and the policies they want to pass. In Africa, no one in Asia yet is really considering the food tax that I know of for health reasons. A lot of countries tax food for just general reasons, but not for health purposes. And we'll need to increase in the future our sugar sweetened beverage taxes, and that's happening in a number of countries. It's just like in tobacco. You don't just leave it at 30, 40, 50, 100%. You increase it to keep trying to get the market smaller and smaller for the unhealthy products that have really no benefit. And that's certainly the case for a lot of the ultra-processed food that has minimal nutritional benefit and great nutritional harm. And the marketing controls, the social media is the big area that countries are working on. Britain actually has a complete law on banning social marketing passed by Parliament under Johnson, but they never implemented it. So we're hoping now the current government is starting to talk about being interested. And we hope they'll consider implementing the existing law. But the biggest area now that our group is working on with countries is using tax money of unhealthy food or sugary beverages to give money to the poor to buy only healthy food, using smartphones and all the apps that we can add with them for the purpose of handling the money and using it only appropriately, targeting it. So these are some of the frontiers that other countries around the world are on. Here, we're trying to start. We're trying to start with sugary beverages. The government is talking about marketing ban. There's discussion about some kind of front of the package labeling. I'm hoping we can direct that more toward warning labels, but right now it's under the control of industry to some extent, who doesn't like a label that works and makes them make changes, even if it doesn't affect their profit in the end. They really want to be unregulated. And that's one of our big challenges globally. And here are the countries with regulations on front of the package profiling so far. Iran with the positive logo, Iran with a Nutri-Mark, they call it, and some other countries there with these different approaches. And then all the countries with warning, putting the red one up there and the Spyglass for Canada, they're all warning labels tested and used in each country. The look of the warning label is going to be different in lots of countries. The African countries, some are using a exclamation point with a rectangle instead of the warning box. It's just going to vary country by country after focus groups test what works best. And I'm not going to go further. We have work that we're doing to identify ultra-processed foods. We've shown that using Codex additive categories, which are the required categories industry must use, that these additives can identify ultra-processed foods, and worked on that. But now the goals in the future are to use the taxes for really helping the poor buy regular healthy food, which they can't afford otherwise, and expanding our coverage both to UPFs as well as the high-end sugar, sodium, saturated fat, what they call the HSSFs in the nutrition literature. And anyway, these are all some of the challenges we're facing. And now what we're really trying to do is race toward a healthier person and healthier society. We may still be overweight, but we can be much healthier if we eat better in terms of preventing more problems. And our goal is really to create healthy eating as a critical component of a healthy lifestyle. And thank you very much.
Professor Popkin, let me summarize a little bit to our colleague ya, especially student. Jadi teman-teman, beliau ini punya pengalaman 40 tahun ya. Mulai melihat bagaimana perubahan cara makan orang di dunia, masuk di Amerika di awal-awal karir beliau, yang mulanya banyak serat, rendah gula, rendah garam, rendah lemak jenuh, itu bergeser makin lama, makin kurang seratnya, makin banyak gulanya, makin banyak garamnya, dan makin banyak lemak jenuhnya. Kemudian karena berbagai perubahan teknologi, gaya hidup segala macam, tidak lagi banyak kalori itu terbakar oleh lifestyle. Akhirnya dua komponen tadi, banyak gula, banyak garam, banyak lemak jenuh, tambah gaya hidup yang tidak bagus tadi, yang banyak kurang gerak, inilah yang menyebabkan pandemi setelah beliau obesitas di dunia, jadi kegemukan. Dan kita tahu kegemukannya adalah faktor pertama dan utama untuk jatuhnya kepada penyakit-penyakit tidak menular. Apakah itu hipertensi, apakah itu kanker, apakah itu stroke ya, diabetes terutama dan seterusnya. Dan ini juga di Indonesia yang membuat kita selalu defisit BPJS habis untuk 4 penyakit yang sebetulnya bisa dicegah kalau kita sadar dengan cara makan dan gaya hidup tadi. Sesederhana itu. Dan kemudian karena banyaknya produk-produk makanan ini, kebiasaan kita yang hanya makan 3 kali itu berubah. Banyak lagi kesempatan makan, mulanya sedikit-sedikit, makin lama makin banyak. Ini nggak jelas lagi mana yang makan pokok, mana yang makan tambahan, mana yang snack. Sudah bercampur dan tidak ada lagi kita menunggu rasa lapar dulu baru makan, tapi makan aja terus, kan tersedia akses itu. Inilah yang membuat dunia panik, karena tadi penyebab-penyebab yang menjadikan penyakit tidak menular tadi bertambah banyak, salah satunya obesitas, dan itu dihubungkan dengan 2 hal tadi itu. Nah, beliau mencari cara bagaimana cara mengatasinya ini. Kalau kita orang Pabial atau orang nutrition education kan berpikir udahlah kita berikan aja penyuluhan ya. Itu jalan juga, tapi beliau punya cara yang lebih strategik. Pertama, bisa enggak dipengaruhi agar industri ini dikontrol, jangan dia semena-mena. Jadi mulailah dibatasi. Sekarang udah mulai juga direncanakan di Indonesia harus ada batasan. Kalau kita minum sesuatu yang dari dari yang dijual itu kayak Coke dan segala macam, sekarang banyak minuman-minuman lokal itu dibatasi berapa persen boleh atau berapa gram boleh kandungan gulanya, kandungan garamnya dan lemaknya. Ini diatur, dan kalau undang-undang mengatur berarti semua produksi dari industri itu akan merujuk ke sana. Itu cara pertama, dan dia mengajukan itu untuk dipakai oleh negara. Yang kedua, diberi pajak kayak pajak rokok. Jadi diberi pajak yang saat ini kita juga belum melakukan di beberapa negara, maksud Chili tadi itu berhasil dengan baik. Bayangkan hanya dengan pajak saja yang lain sama, itu konsumsi daripada dia kalori, kemudian saturated fat ya, itu menurun sampai 37% hanya dengan memberikan pajak, dan itu hanya 10%, Prof. Finalis. 10% diberikan pajak pada makanan-makanan yang tadi, yang kaya lemak, kaya gula, dan kaya satu lagi garam. Nah, dan ini tidak cukup, bisa ditambah lagi dengan selain dari pajak adalah labeling. Jadi di label itu kayak rokok kan sekarang sudah diberikan tanda bahwa kalau rokok ini akan membunuh dan menyebabkan penyakit-penyakit ini ya. Mulainya dari 20% dari halaman itu, dari muka kotak rokok itu atau bungkusnya. Diharapkan di label ini juga naik dari 10% dari itu 20%, kalau perlu sampai 50%. Jadi separuh itu adalah warning betapa bahayanya makanan itu. Itu juga kita belum ada. Nah, pertanyaan sekarang untuk kita di Indonesia, dan beliau datangkan untuk memberikan apa pembelajaran dari pengalaman negara-negara yang berhasil, yang tidak berhasil. Amerika termasuk yang struggle dan belum berhasil. Tapi tadi Chili bisa, di South Africa dilakukan. Jadi untuk itu silakan kesempatan ini bertanya, boleh dalam bahasa Inggris, boleh dalam bahasa Indonesia. Yang penting ilmunya, bukan bahasanya ya. Dan gunakan kesempatan lebih kurang 45 menit itu untuk menggali sebanyak mungkin dari pengalaman dan pengetahuan Profesor Barry Popkins. I just introduce you to the summary of your 40 years experience, and we would like them to ask you frankly, even they use Indonesian language, we will translate to you. Oke, siapa yang mau mulai? Ya, silakan, langsung aja. Nanti yang lain siap-siap aja ya. Kita ambil 3 penanya dulu ya, bertanya. Ya.
Baik, terima kasih Prof. Pasli. Saya di sini disuruh sebagai penanya wajib, Prof.
Iya, please ya.
Perkenalkan Prof. Popkins, I'm Fatima Eliana. I'm a diabetologist and endocrinologist here. I'm a teacher in Yarsi University Medical Faculty of Medicine. I have 2 questions for you. As you
dekatkan mic-nya dikit.
I have 2 questions for you. The first question is, what were the most significant challenges in the early years of implementing global food policies? And the second question is, which stakeholders play the most important roles in shaping global food policy? Nanti pertanyaan Prof. Pasli belakangan ya, Prof.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe you can, yeah.
So there's a long history of food policy. I'm only talking here, I was talking about healthy food policy. But clearly, dealing with nutrition goes back decades. It goes back to the 1930s and 40s as we began to discover and identify what we called kwashiorkor, marasmus, and then later xerophthalmia, which is a vitamin A deficiency. So originally, vitamin, protein, and energy deficiencies that created different conditions. And that's a different set of scholars, very important in the building of the science on just what were nutrients and so forth, that came out of the 1900 to 1950 era. In the next era, people were dealing with hunger and undernutrition, including myself. But this new era, where we're dealing with this changing food supply and the transition toward non-communicable diseases and all age groups eating these unhealthy manufactured foods is a very new era. And in that era, key people are from countries, from Mexico. Juan Rivera was critical and leading from the research and nutrition side, the whole science behind sugary beverages and pushing it and taking it to conclusion. I helped him, but he led the charge there. In Chile, on the other hand, a very eminent scientist by the name of Ricardo Huawei, who has subsequently had Alzheimer's and no longer functions, but led and worked with the parliament and the Congress there to create the set of laws that we see in Chile. And more recent scholars are leading the effort of changing, improving the laws and so forth, and the evaluation. And there's a lot of these young scholars across the world. I'm one of the few from the high-income countries who have been working with them for a long time. There are others who have done other things. There's a group called Informus, led by Boyd Swinburne from New Zealand, who works on monitoring in some countries policy changes in the food environment, and has done that in a lot of countries. But in terms of the real food policy and those impact, it's now being led in each country by different scholars. South Africa, there's a nutritionist, Rena Swart, who's leading the efforts to get the front of the package labeling. A different scholar, a medical doctor, led to get the sugary beverage tax, and almost single-handedly convinced the government to do that. So there's lots of people in each country here who will be the scholars to lead the way. It could be the Deputy Minister of Health. It could be others. I don't know yet. I haven't seen the champions and understood enough of this country to know who the champions are behind this. But in India, there's a man by the name of Arjun Panti and some others really pushing this approach. So it varies by country a lot. And it's in the country it has to happen. We can provide science, we can provide lots of materials and help for them and give them the advice that and talk about the evaluations we've done. But each country is led by other nutrition and medical and other scientists and scholars. And it's quite different. In India, the whole medical nutritional establishment, all India, 14 huge medical schools across the different regions, and the whole research establishments that are linked with them, funded by the national government, they're all behind putting in the warning label, and they're leading the charge along with this man Pandey, who leads an NGO as well as being a nutrition researcher. So it varies country by country. In Thailand, when we got the choices label, it was two different people, Khraisit Tantasirin, who was an elder scholar, and then a younger faculty member at Mahidol, the chair of the department, who subsequently died from a chronic disease, but led that charge to work with the FDA. But I've convinced them and was there almost every meeting to get the Choices logo in Thailand back then. And we met in not only Thailand, but Singapore and Malaysia. The three together were holding meetings, and we got that in Thailand, and Singapore put in their own version of what they wanted to do. But that was the beginning of front of package labelings. They've just not been shown to work. And now my goal is to help countries adopt what will work and base it on science and experience and rigorous evaluations published in top journals. So that's the first, the big answer, I think. But there are other parts of your question, I think. Do you have other parts I didn't answer?
Yeah. So far, yeah.
The mic go back to her?
Ya, tolong kasih mic. Udah. Do you have to add? Or do you want to clarify? Please.
I think it's enough.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, second.
Boleh saya tanya ke Prof. Pasli, boleh nggak Prof? Saya satu lagi. Ke Prof. Pasli.
Ini mahasiswa satu dulu, nanti langsung ya. Ya, oke. Go. So we have a student also.
Good.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good morning everyone. Good morning Professor Barry M. Hopkins PhD. Good morning Professor Journalist. Good morning Professor Fasli Jalal and my lecturer here. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Muhammad Kautsar. I'm young doctor, or we can call co-assistant or intern. In Bahasa we call koas. And my question is, considering your emphasis on subsidies that must we add, how do you view Indonesia free nutritious meals program in public schools? And could this program fill the current policy gap in food subsidies you mentioned? That's it. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
So the role of subsidy, because you mentioned the subsidy the poor for the meal, and then how the school feeding can also play a role in subsidizing the poor, the needy.
Clearly, if they instituted the sugary beverage tax, they could label and target the money to go for school feeding, or they could use it for creating a subsidy for the poor to get healthy food like fruits and vegetables and other things they can't afford. So it will vary. It depends on the country and what they decide to do. Some countries say, we don't want to use the money for anything but general finances. We're very broke and we need the money. But many countries are targeting it and using it for things like school feeding, or in one country, Mexico, healthy, good potable water in the schools and other things like that. So it varies quite a bit by country to country what will be done in terms of targeting. In your country, given the enormous layout for school feeding, the government may want to do that. And it may incentivize them to even increase the tax above what they have now, because they're putting an enormous commitment behind school feeding, and it is expensive.
Could you elaborate a little bit, Professor Popkin? Could you elaborate a little bit the success of the Brazilian in changing from the much processed food to natural food in the school feeding program?
In Brazil, starting in about 2010, 2011, they put in a law that required 30% of the food in the schools to come from local farmers. So it would be real food going to the schools to prepare and give for children. That was the beginning. It took around 6-7 years to implement that and really get every country. And that's because farmers had to often form co-ops and had someone in charge of doing the paperwork. They had to learn to do that. And the schools had to learn to do procurement from the local farmers and work this out. So it took a while. Then, more recently, what the government has decided is they want to get rid of all the catering and ultra-processing in the schools, come from centralized kitchens with a lot of ultra-processed and unhealthy food. And so they put in a requirement, it has to be, and they added a lot of money to the school budget. So it could be, they could buy real food and prepare it in the local school districts. But they already had the infrastructure that had been developed over time. And it's hard. Your country is just beginning in a huge country with many islands to create school feeding. It's going to take a long time to develop the infrastructure, and I suspect initially there'll probably be caterers in each island providing a lot of this. A lot of times it'll be ultra-processed food and not so healthy, but it's a beginning. They have to develop the infrastructure before you can do like Brazil did And the revolution, now this year it's required 90%. Next year it's going to require 90% of all the food be real food. The other 5% only can be spices and condiments.
Thank you. Silakan. Ya, langsung. Iya Ibu. Iya.
Yeah, thank you. So,
There's a woman over there.
Iya, tadi di sana tadi yang apa ya? Yang nunjuk tangan ya? Siapa tadi yang nambahkan?
kalau ada mahasiswa, masuk aja.
Iya,
duluan.
silakan.
Saya, okay.
Ya, oke. Please.
So basically, I have two questions. Number one is regarding.
Perkenalkan nama
Oh
dikit
yeah,
dia ya.
I'm Chandra, one of the lecturer here in the RC. The concept of front page labeling, the concept of taxation, the concept of controlling industry, etc. The one that you mentioned, it is just like the way we control tobacco. And here in Indonesia, we already use those kind of technique for control tobacco. We use everything. I mean, front page labeling, warning, increased tax, health education, etc. But still, number of smoker is not decreasing significantly. So based on those experience, if we use the same approach for this issue, we might face the same challenges. You have any idea how to control this one based on our own experience? That is my first question.
Right. Clearly, smoking is decreased in this country. It may not have decreased as much as you want, and it may take a lot more taxes and other things to really work on it, but I don't know all the details there. In terms of the food approach, all I know is that in very poor countries as well as higher income countries, Chile's much higher income than the other Latin American countries, it works. The warning label seems to have worked. And it's being adopted, and initial results from a lot of other countries suggest the same kind of strong impact. What it will do in Indonesia, we need trials. My colleague actually with GAIN a few years ago did one trial that showed warning labels work somewhat better than traffic lights and others. But it wasn't as we'd like to do another one that was better done with scholars from universities in Jakarta sometime. But the point is that we need research in each country. When we develop these policies, we do focus groups in the countries, we do random control studies where we test out different logos and pictures and things, what works best and not. So it's a process. Your country hasn't done any of that. A lot of what they're considering is not based on any research. It's not based on science. It's based on politics. And we'll need, if we were working here, others to create a more scientific basis to test out some options also. But in the case of taxation, we know it'll work. We have so many countries now that have adopted and it's working in that I can't imagine if I put a 20% tax on sugary beverages in this country that low-income people won't reduce significantly their purchasing. It'll be different than tobacco. It is for all food products that we've seen to date. Taxation, whether on healthy food or unhealthy, works and impacts purchasing. So for the labeling, there needs to be more research. I don't think we know what works best completely. We did one small study with GAIN in one province area, but it really needs a bigger study. and better studied. And if we were involved here, we would certainly be involved in that. It would need to be done first.
Okay, thank you. Silakan. Yeah, go ahead.
Good. I want you to.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Good morning, Professor Barry Popkin. My name is Afia. I'm currently studying as co-assistant. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for coming here and giving me the chance to study based on your research. So, based on the research that you were conducted, it stated that most of the manufacturer made unhealthy food with high sugar, low nutrition, etc. And my question is, how can we, as a part of health community, educate and ensure the government to change some or maybe most of the law regulations to support and promote healthy food? Thank you very much.
Well, I think I mentioned several areas the government can work in, and clearly taxation is one that governments are often like to use because they get revenue, whether it can be used for school feeding or other things that would reduce their, it would help them. The warning label, the marketing bans, the healthy food in schools, they've all been shown in other countries to work. We need research, but the marketing ban for sure works wherever it's put in. Right now, there's such an omnipresence of food marketing everywhere you look. On your smartphones every day, I bet you see a number of food ads. If young children play games, I bet half of them are created by food companies on their smartphones and such. It's just omnipresent. And as we walk down the streets or drive or take a bus or whatever, we just see food marketing and unhealthy food everywhere. So the marketing ban is a natural win for any country. It's a difficult one because it affects not only the food companies, but it affects advertisers and others who make money from marketing unhealthy food. However, we haven't seen marketing go down. We've seen it change to healthier food. The companies still want to get their market share. They still want to sell. They just will have to market something healthier. So we haven't seen advertisers in the end lose their income. But we need to see more countries with marketing bans to really be able to study these factors much better. But marketing is a natural. Front of the package labeling needs some research in this country, to be honest. What kind of logo would work best, how you compare the government kind of scoring system versus the warning label to see which people react more to and how it prevents the foods that we want them to stop eating, the high in added sugar, sodium, and saturated fats that are really the guts of what WHO says we really need to do. So we need studies on that. But I suspect in the end we'll find the warning label. It has in every country that studied it been the most impactful.
Professor Popkin, you mentioned that these three interventions above of the regular or traditional nutrition education, blah blah, yeah. But what do you think?
No, these are in addition.
Yeah, in addition.
Traditional
yeah.
services, other things can
Still.
go on.
But how can we improve the
But
quality
yeah.
of effectiveness?
But the traditional nutrition education hasn't done much.
It
It hasn't been that successful. These approaches, based on the histories, tend to work and tend to have a huge impact, bigger than we've ever had with nutrition education, bigger than we've had with any of the existing programs out there. So they add. They won't replace medical treatment. It'll just limit the number of people who are likely to need to be treated. it'll just make us healthier. But I don't think that we're talking about reducing any current services, any current programs. What we're adding is a layer using modern technology dealing with social marketing, TV, billboards, print, that isn't done right now. What we do now is say what you should do, but we don't ban the unhealthy, which is marketed so completely that we don't ever hear about the healthy. I mean, industry can spend $1 billion on some ads, and your government can spend 500,000 rupiah or 1 million rupiah. I mean, they can't outspend industry.
Yeah.
And
What
that's
about
the
the
problem.
use of the more structure like school system from
the
early childhood to?
And school feeding and procurement in general. We're not only talking about schools. It can be done for the military. It can be done for government hospitals. Other places can have healthier food as well. But what we are talking about is government procurement, which is so powerful, particularly now that you'll have your school feeding. The procurement is a lot of money. And who it goes to and how it's spent and what kind of food they get is going to be very important. In the short term, I don't expect it'll have to be catered and people with outside big kitchens, centralized. But in the long term, we'll need to then, the country will need to consider if they can afford moving toward healthier food.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any more? Belakang tadi ya, ada. Ini Jo, silakan. Ya, ya, tolong dikasih mic. Cepat dikit mic-nya. Yang baju yang apa pakai hijab merah, tolong mic-nya siapa penelitiannya?
Thank you.
Ya, oke.
Go, Prof. I want to ask about the.
Perkenalkan nama dulu
I
dan.
am Nur Asia from Nutrition Department, ERC Medical School.
Okay.
My question is there any regulation to limit trans fatty acid in chili or others? We know that trans fatty acids is very much in the snack food to make the fat more stabilization. So we hydrogenation process.
Yeah.
We know that trans fatty acid is not good for our health. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Trans fatty acids are very unhealthy. It's one of the most unhealthy fats out there. It's super hydrogenated, linked to lots of chronic diseases. A number of, if your country hasn't banned them and limited them, then there are a number of countries using a warning label on trans fatty acids if they don't have other bans or they haven't eliminated them. So yes, that's important. And I didn't know and I hadn't asked anybody what the trans fat situation was in your country. But it would have a warning label if you don't have any other limit. And the warning label will be for any trans fat, or possibly trans fats above 0.5 grams per 100 grams, or something limited. But we would like it to be for any trans fat in a package, actually, other than natural trans fats.
Okay. Who else? Masih ada? Silakan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good morning, Professor. My name is Bayu Saputra. I'm from primary care family medicine programs at ERC University. It's my honor to meet you today. We found that what you presented is very insightful. But in the field, in the small communities, we encounter many difficulties to change patient eating habits, especially in lower income communities. This problem, the problem is the fact that the unhealthy food is affordable than is more affordable and the healthy food. My question is, what policy we can plan for these communities? Thank you.
Yeah, one of the reasons I talked about the subsidies and that we're working with a number of countries to find ways to subsidize for the poor, actually give them income to buy only healthy food, is that they can't afford it. They can't, but we do find in the countries that they do react to the warning label and change as much as they can. They can buy other cheaper food that doesn't have as much sodium, sugar, or saturated fat in it. And they have. But it doesn't make them as healthy as we would like because they can't afford it. And you're absolutely right. Without finding ways to give them free or very cheap, healthy foods, we're stuck. And that's why we're doing so much work with countries, experimenting on approaches for giving income to the poor, using the money from taxes on unhealthy food and sugary beverages to help the poor. It's critical. It's the one thing that we haven't done well anywhere in the world. We have subsidies all over, but it's not to help the poor get healthy food. And we need that.
Okay, if any question from the online, please do so. Panitia tolong disajikan wajah-wajah apa ya yang ikut dengan online. Sebelum nunggu online, masih ada? Silakan.
Good morning, professors. My name is Mira, and so from what I understand, you said that like some products in higher income countries don't have a very high sugar component, but when they're sold in a lower income countries, higher sugar, there are higher sugar components in the products. Why do you think? Why? First of all, why? Is it because it makes the product more cheap? Does it make the product cheaper? If so, how do you think is the effective way to make the product cheaper without hiring the sugar component, like maybe changing the sugar ingredients into something healthier? Thank you.
So the question is, why, for example, is infant formula that Nestle sells in India have added sugar, but it doesn't have added sugar in Switzerland or France or Germany? This is an example. Most of the companies do this. Because in India, there's a very high sugar preference, and you like sweet foods here as well. And so adding this, if the mother tastes the infant formula, once she buys it for the infant, she'll see it's sweet, and she'll like it better and think the kids will like it better. That's kind of the model. It's not cheapness at all. It's just added because formula has basic requirements that must be in it, but they have minimums. They have no maximums. And so you can add sugar and they don't ban it. It still can be part of formula. And all the toddler milks and all the infant foods increasingly in Asia are adding sugar. And 0 to 3-year-olds need no added sugar in their diet to create proper sweetness preference and live a healthy life. But doing this enhances their sweetness preference their whole life.
Oke, panitia ada yang memantau pertanyaan dari itu? Is there any question from online? If not, let's continue the conversation. Will be the last question ya, please. Siapa lagi? If not, this is the last question. Okay, for us as a university, Prof. Hopkins, how we can contribute to the development of the school feeding, and also we call the free nutritious food for the needy?
At this point, this is a program that hasn't started in this country. And so the issue is to get involved in the nutrition standards they're creating for the food, and get involved in government committees that are designing this. This is like completely new for your country.
Right.
When I was involved in my country when we started this, and then we did the first evaluation of it, it was brand new. You had to get the infrastructure to do everything. It was complex. And in South Africa, where we had to first identify all the schools, because all the colored areas from the apartheid era, they didn't know where the schools were. And then we had to figure out logistics, and we had no roads for dozens of schools, through hundreds actually throughout the country. We had to work out a very simple food like peanut butter and sandwiches that we used first. Healthy bread, whole grain bread, with something like that mothers could prepare in schools, because we could bring the peanut butter once a week. We could give them bread a couple times a week, and mothers could make it for the kids. And that was with all the infrastructure we had. Then over time, the government started creating more infrastructure. Now they have real meals. But initially, it was all impossible. You couldn't get the food to the schools.
Okay. Because we also afraid there's so many criticism right now to the early part of the school feeding. We don't want that to defeat the main goal. So then what is the transition, the indicator for better transition, do you think?
Well,
so we can defeat the criticism, because this is zero-sum game from the public financing. A lot of other sector will eat it up their budget because of this.
Yeah. No, and you have a huge country with islands with very different preferences and patterns and so forth. I mean, but you have roads that go to the schools. You know where the schools are. Each local government has all of that organized.
Right.
But this is a brand new program. And that means there's no kitchens in the schools, except some fancy or private schools. And so they're going to have to bring in food. They don't have the money to create a kitchen everywhere.
Right.
And it's going to take time. And so the question is, do they do a minimum really healthy food, or do they have a full meal that's catered and isn't quite so healthy? And it's a big decision for the government and everybody to make, because it's a limited amount of money. The $10 billion, that's the beginning investment, won't go to all the schools. It will go to maybe Java.
Yeah.
And they'll learn. And it's going to take a lot of learning.
Okay. Let's give a big round of applause to Professor Barry Popkin for his inspiring lecture. Thank you, Prof. Hopkins. Yeah.
Thank you once again for Professor Barry and Professor Fasli for your valuable contribution. We kindly, really inspiring and really enlightening lecture today. And now, as a token of appreciation, we now invite Professor Dr. Jurnalis Udin, PAK, in front of the stage to present a plaque and souvenir to Professor Barry M. Popkins. Please give them a warm round of applause. Thank you, Professor Jurnalis, Professor Barry, and Professor Fasli. We kindly invite you now to return to your seat. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our international guest lecture today. On behalf of Yarsi University and the organizing committee, we would like to express our sincere gratitude to Professor Barry M. Popkins for his valuable contribution, Professor Fasli Jalal for his leadership and moderation, all distinguished guests and organizing teams, and all participants on site and online. May this event inspire stronger collaboration and better food policy across nations. Thank you and see you again at our next academic event. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.